if there was ever a time that need to be strung together, now's the time. And so we look at that. As far as taking our time, observe, absorb, reflect, think this through of what that means. We've had a lot of things. We've grown in a lot of areas. We've also had opportunities that we recognize for opportunities to improve with that. But we are actually going to be sending something to our staff and our families tomorrow, just kind of as far as some things being stronger together. It's nothing new, but it is just some thoughts and how moving forward and some things that we've done through the last few years. Our hiring practices, we recognize that we wanted our staff to better reflect our student population, and it's improved. It's not where it needs to be, but it's improved from 4% of our staff to 7% to 9%. We've made progress there, 125% increase from just a few years ago, as far as having our staff better reflect our student population. So we're excited about that. There's a long way to go, a lot of work to do as we look at that. Our next, we're going to be having some series of listening sessions. We don't claim to have all the answers, but we feel we're stronger together with our community, and we're going to have some opportunities for our staff, our parents, our families, and our community members going forward here over the next 2-3 months as we start school this fall, and have some conversations about and learning and educating us on what's working, what's not, and how we can be stronger going forward. So we're excited about that. We've had some different things. Equity Counsel, excuse me, prior to my arrival, and I've shared this different times, we had a diversity committee, and we changed it. We started over. It was they didn't have it for a few years, and we started it back, but changed the name to an Equity Counsel, and just the base word of being equal versus divide, we thought was really important. And that's one of the number one goals of that is just our hiring practices to have our staff better reflect our student population. And as I shared the numbers there, we're making progress, but we know we have a long ways to go. So that's something I think is important for all of us going forward. Working with Lincoln University, Dr. Scarborough, working with Dr. Seymour and Dr. Shivers in their education department. We got some neat things going there, a grant of a grow your own. It got paused this spring here with the COVID-19, but we're excited about that. And then working with Mizzou, they were coming and working with the culturally responsive classrooms and what that looks like. A lot of good conversations there. So some good things going, but we also recognize we have a lot of opportunities, and we're excited to work stronger together going forward with that. I wanted to share here just the Jeff City High School's graduation. The date from in May to June, it was going to be last Friday. Right now it's scheduled for July 10th. We've shared with folks that we would have a decision by the 19th of June, which is this Friday, which is 3 weeks prior to that, if it was going to be extended to July 31st. When we surveyed our families and our students, they said that they'd like to have a normal graduation, and they would rather extend the dates, have it in the middle or even the end of the summer to where everyone could be there. They would rather do that than to limit the number of folks that can attend here early summer into the school year. So we're at the July 10th, and we'll let folks know by this Friday if it may be July 31st. And then the next date after that is actually on that Saturday, where then we would limit the numbers and divide them into different two groups, to where we could have limited numbers, but have that outside on August 1st. So that is the end final date that we could have it, but we hope possibly before then, if we could have it for all of our folks to attend possibly. So that was in response to our families sharing with us that they would like to have it, even if it means kicking the can a little bit, to have it a little bit later for our families. So we are excited about that. So that's what I've got at this time. You guys have any questions about any of that for me?
I'm assuming when you're talking about the Equity Council and some of the listening group things that we're going to start doing, that'll all be made public to show everyone what we are doing with invitations and...
Absolutely. Now, the Equity Council, that's been in place. It will this 18 months, 20 months. That is continuing. We're meeting quarterly, and so we'll continue to meet. Our last one was in January. We didn't have our meeting here this spring with COVID-19, but we will start that again here soon this summer as far as our next Equity Council meeting. As far as with the opportunities in the community-wide, those are going to be twofold. Ones of just having conversations with folks, but then also having opportunities for our communities in our school settings, in our school communities. We don't have those scheduled because we're going to be working with our building principals as we start back with our families to try to engage with them.
I
So
think that that's what people want to see, is just
absolutely,
we're having conversations publicly. And
absolutely.
I think we sit here as a all whiteboard right now, we
Right.
need to be really cognizant of what people are saying and go out and ask questions and ask people what they need, because we don't know. So I think that's what people are asking for right now, is just starting to
Absolutely.
keep the talk going.
Right, absolutely. So, okay, that's all I have at this time.
Okay. Mr. Hoffman?
I'm going to be brief at this time because you're going to get to hear a lot from this time because you're going to get to hear a lot from me a little bit later. So I just wanted to expand on the one topic that Larry mentioned, and that was the summer feeding that we've been doing. So through the end of May, we had served a total of 116,792 meals. So that was from when we stopped attending school through the end of May. We averaged 1,123 students per day from April 1st to May 31st. So that 2-month period, we averaged 1,123 students. So we were serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner most of that time. So that's how you get to this 116,000 meals. Since June 1st started, which we don't really know why, we've only averaged 640 students per day. We stopped serving supper, and so it's just breakfast and lunch. But it's dropped off a lot, and we're not sure why. But so that's a little bit of a negative, but we're still serving 640 students breakfast and lunch every day, and then a buddy pack in the evening. So we're for sure continuing that through the end of June. We're going to reevaluate what July looks like. A lot of districts through the whole time have done like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, to where Monday you deliver breakfast and lunch for 2 days, Wednesday breakfast and lunch for 2 days, and then we would do Friday breakfast, lunch, and then a buddy pack. So we're evaluating that. Nothing's been decided yet, but as our numbers have dropped a lot, it seems to make a lot of sense to maybe back that off. It'll save a lot on staff costs, and but still super pleased with all the efforts that have gone on to do that. So you'll hear a lot more from me in the upcoming agenda items, but happy to answer any questions.
It's great.
Thank you.
No business. Thank you, Jason.
Shelby?
Good evening. We would like to share with you our staff and parent surveys that we have done over the last couple of weeks as we work at figuring out what school is going to look like this fall. We felt it was extremely important for us to engage with our stakeholders to figure out how do people feel about school and what it might look like this fall. So we actually, Jason? Well, it's not working for me. There we go. So we actually did 2 staff surveys, which seems like a lot, but there were 2 main tracks that we were trying to gather of information. So our Panorama education survey is what we use when Brenda and I present survey data to all of you. And they actually did one for us that was about the social and emotional well-being of our staff. And so it was mainly like, how are you navigating through this? What mental health needs do we need to address? And we left that open for 2 weeks. We had 66% of our staff complete it, which we were very pleased with that. And then we decided to do another survey that was focusing on, what about school? How do you feel about school this fall? What do you think it needs to look like? What are our needs that we need to address over the summer? That again was open for 2 weeks, and this time we sent it to all categories of employees. So not only did we do our certified staff, but we did food service, custodians, and maintenance, our learning support staff, so that would be all people outside of teaching positions that support learning, building support staff, so that would be our secretaries, and then our Board of Education office and our tech staff. So there were actually 5 areas that we used for our certified staff, which was collaboration and distance learning. So what did you see as our needs? Where do we have strengths and where do we have growth opportunities? What was family communication like? Professional needs. So this was, if we need to provide professional development, so should a closure happen again, or how can we enhance our current learning opportunities to include more technology so that our students are prepared if we have to do alternative methods of instruction. And then student engagement, and then overall staff well-being and social emotional needs. And I think it's important to note that one of the things that our whole focus has been in doing these surveys and gathering this data is that we recognize that people are going to give us their very best when they feel safe and secure. So we have a huge responsibility to make sure that we put a plan in place that we can defend and sustain in keeping our people safe. So that's why this survey information was very important for us. And then non-certified staff, we used the same buckets, just not as many because obviously they weren't facilitating learning, but how did they get support when we were in closure? What professional development needs do they have? And then again, the whole well-being and social emotional needs, which we feel are extremely important. So these are the overall results. And so you can see the categories: certified staff, learning support, building secretaries, food service, custodian maintenance, and then BOE is the board office and technology department at Dix Road. So when you look at that, how are you concerned about your social well-being, about your physical well-being, supporting people in your life? And that was probably that is the lowest that we saw, that when people were trying to do their jobs while being parents, a lot of them had reported that it was challenging beyond what they could even comprehend on how to just support the people in their life and the people that were trying to support that they work with every day. We were encouraged by, did they all feel that they had someone within their school or outside of school that they could count on? And so those numbers were encouraging for us. Technology, having that access was also very encouraging information for us. And then we asked about internet access because we realized that some people live in remote areas where internet may not be accessible. So we worked through some of those logistics with some of our families, but we recognize that we may need to work through some of those with our staff. So we also did open-ended responses. So what we learned through professional development. So what helped them and what do we still need? So basically what helped them is also what we need more information on. So using all the Google products that we had, we have some very tech-savvy staff, but we have some that recognize that we have opportunities to help them. So we're gathering a bunch of people to help us put some opportunities together that staff feel they need to learn how to better their technology skills through Google. Then we want to be able to provide some training for them also. Building relationships, which was one of the pieces that when we talk about professional development, sometimes having an understanding of trauma, mental health needs, what families are going through, so that everyone has an understanding of how to relate to families, because we usually only know our own frame of reference, but how do we help support those that may be struggling? So that was an area of professional development, which we already had those pieces, working and getting those in place. So this just amplifies our reason and opportunity to do that. Successful communication with families and students. This was a challenge because we found that people were using multiple ways to communicate, which is very, very important, but families had indicated that they were overwhelmed because it could be one of your child's teachers. Well, it could be 7 of their teachers contacting you on the same day, the same way. You may contact with one of them, but not all of them. And so that was some of the feedback that some of the teachers had shared, that families just said, stop calling me. So then they found alternative ways to communicate, which was good in scheduling that and thinking it through. The biggest barriers was about the whole engagement piece. How do you keep students and families engaged when they are overwhelmed, and what is necessary for us to consider realistic expectations to put on students and families? And that helps us as we move in, should we ever have to do a closure again or provide alternative methods of instruction. What are realistic expectations for families, for students, for staff, so that everyone knows where their lanes of responsibility are. And another challenge that when we talk about barriers is our young learners that may have not had access to a lot of technology, and all of a sudden they have to do this through technology, and even their parents may not have been able to navigate technology, and not giving them the learning opportunities that they deserve. So we know we have a big learning curve that we need to close that gap this fall, but people have come around the table and they're working, and we're going to be ready when they are able to come back to school. And then one of the things that I think that was encouraging for all of us is the most meaningful opportunities that came out of this were about building relationships with students and family. It really wasn't necessarily about learning, but it was understanding families and reaching out and connecting with them in ways that they may never have had the opportunity to do so. And so I think it gave our teachers the confidence that, yeah, it's okay for me to pick up the phone and just call and say, hey, how are you doing today? Is there anything I can do to help you? And so that's where it was really encouraging for us to know that our teachers were able to reach out to families and support them in ways that they have never had to do that before. So in addition to the staff survey, we did the parent survey. So Ryan is going to share that information.
Okay. So we sent out our back to school surveys, we call them, to all parents in the district, and then also again to staff, because as we've been sitting around the table with AC, multiple times, sitting around the Google Meet, either way, talking about coming back to school, we realized very quickly that no one's going to give us these answers. There's conflicting guidance that comes from different experts. No one's going to just make the decision for us. And we also all come to the table with our own assumptions and opinions about some of the guidance. And so we're sitting around scratching our heads, how do we truly make the best decision for our staff and our families? And we thought the best thing to do is to go straight to them and ask them kind of how they're feeling with what we know today. How likely are they to send their child to school this fall? Or as a staff member, how comfortable are you with coming to school this fall? And rather than us making assumptions about what we think will be their priorities, we would have feedback and data to support as we're making decisions moving forward. So we left the survey open for a little under 2 weeks. It's actually still open now because we'd like to get as much feedback as we can, and we thought we might get some more after tonight even. But we've had 3,500 parents that have responded, representing just under 5,000 students. We also did separate surveys for Nichols and some of our early childhood special education families to just get a little bit more targeted information from them. We've had 771 staff responses. This was as of June 12th. So you can see from our parent survey participation that we had 250 to 350 for each grade level, which we think is a pretty good response. It's broken down by the schools, by the buildings again, just over 3,500 responses total. So we think that that's a good segment of our total parent population. Some of the themes that emerged from their responses, there was a combination of very likely and likely to send their school if temperature checks are something that we instigate. 81% responded that. That was one of the ones that we had questioned how valuable that would be to people, so now we know. Sanitation is incredibly important, equally important with social distancing. Those are kind of the top 3 priorities that emerged. As you move to the how folks feel about hybrid education as an option, they're kind of split 50-50. Masks, as you can imagine, is a very polarizing topic. People feel strongly about that one way or another. And then when faced with the option of going back to school 100% virtual, only 26% responded that they'd be likely to send their students. So that lets us know that, we have a lot of work to do to try to get kids in seats this fall. As you can see, again, we asked them to rank their preference. So increased sanitation was the item that received the most number 1 votes, social distancing with the most number 2 votes, and temperature checks with the most number 3 votes. Those 3 were the most important priorities. We did hear feedback from some families saying it's impossible to pick. I want all of these together. But we felt that this would just give us some direction as we are looking to make decisions to kind of know how folks feel. So the open-ended questions, we got a lot of comments about families who were just appreciative of all the work that the staff did, everything that went into keeping our students engaged during the closure. They appreciated how quickly we spun up, sending work home when having to close and make that decision. They want overwhelmingly for students to return to in-seat this fall. There are families with parents and or students or family members in the household that have health conditions, so obviously they have concerns about what those health and safety measures will look like the fall. Virtual education, I think they gave us a lot of grace that we put that together quickly, but ultimately they know and we know that we have improvements that we need to make if we were to go to another virtual option this fall. Masks, varying opinions. A lot of people have concerns whether or not we really can accomplish social distancing with students of all ages, how well we'll be able to pull that off. There were some concerns about the student accountability piece for our secondary students in the fourth quarter, whether or not how engaged and how inspired they were to turn in work with the holding of the grades. And then also bus concerns with how we could get students to wear masks if we aren't able to social distance on our buses. We had good participation from our teacher and staff survey as well. Nice representation from all buildings with 771 total responses. And the themes from the teachers and the staff, we were somewhat surprised, were very similar to the themes that we heard from our parents. Sanitation and social distancing are both important. Asking about temperature checks was a bit of a mixed bag for teachers. Hybrid education was less important to them. They're not, so meaning for the teachers and the staff, the question is, how important are each of these items to you feeling comfortable with coming back to school in the fall? So the offering of a hybrid education was a low importance level to our teachers, as well as the wearing of masks for teachers and or students. So that's good to know that our staff overwhelmingly feels that if you focus on sanitation with a combination of social distancing, that we will feel comfortable coming back in the fall. We asked them as well to rank their preferred work environment. So in-seat education received the most #1 votes, social distancing the most #2 votes, and temperature checks, actually those are flipped, and a most #3, very close, social distancing and temperature checks. There are concerns with returning, similar as well, sanitation, social distancing with a combination of all three. And so, we know that we have some areas with very clear guidance that we need to focus on implementing come the fall. Open-ended questions were very similar. They appreciate our concern for their safety and helping them to come back because they do have a desire to get back to in-person education. There are staff members who have health concerns. They have questions about sick leave, and there are some measures being put in place at the federal level even to accommodate for that. Ultimately, if they do have to look at the possibility of future virtual education, they want training to help them implement that. They have the same concerns whether or not we really can accomplish social distancing with reduced class sizes, which will be incumbent upon all of us to work on making sure that if we put those measures in place, we follow through. And they want decisions that are based on science and not politics or whatever is being said in the media. They really want us to listen to the experts. So they're not really as keen on a hybrid model either. And they do have concerns that parents will send their sick children to school because we see that during the normal school year anyways. So results to action, Shelby?
So as we look at all of this, it's very important when they talk about how they want us to focus on what we know. So what kind of data, what kind of science backs our decision making. But at the same time, what do our people need from us so that they are confident when they come back to work or they send their children to school, that we have a safe plan put together. So we're using all of our feedback and all of the data that we know to try to put our plans together. Obviously, our goal is to get students back in our seats. But we also know we have a responsibility to plan for 100% virtual instruction, whether it's we have to provide alternative method of instruction for all of our students or for those that may have situations that would merit a parent wanting their child to be engaged in 100% virtual instruction. So we are organizing stakeholder groups. So right now we worked with elementary principals last week. We're meeting with secondary principals this week, and just working through what is this going to look like in your building, and what do you need from a district level, and where do we need to have guidelines as a whole, and then what are you able to execute in your buildings. And so we had some great conversations and just talking about how we need to look at the social distancing, look at sanitation, look at all of the pieces that people have shared that they have concerns about. So what do we need to put in place so that we can put people's minds at ease that we have a plan? So we look forward to keeping you updated as we work through this. Right now we're gathering as much information as we can so that we can truly make informed decisions. And ultimately, like we said, our goal is to get our students back in school as quickly and as safely as we can. Anybody have any questions?
Are we looking at some specifics, like for example, if we wanted to do temperature checks, what that would take? What that would cost, what instruments we would use? We're looking at some specific things like that.
So our administrative council divided into two groups. So we have an operations side and a learning side. So the operations side, so that's Jason and Frank and Chad Suter and Ryan and Brenda are all working through those pieces. And then the other half of us are looking at the learning side of it. And so we knew we had to divide and conquer. So, but those are the exact things that they're working through on what that might look like, what it's going to cost. And
keep in mind, the survey ended Friday, so this is all.
Okay.
Temperature checks was one that was a big topic of discussion, and seeing what our parents thought was really important, and obviously it's important, so we know what direction we need to go now.
Yeah.
I think for myself, when I filled out the survey for my 3, while taking temperatures of 400 plus kids, it's crazy to think about. I think about all the times it would have kept my kids healthy from like influenza and strep throat. I think Nora had strep throat 3 times this year in the short amount of time that they were in school. So it would make me feel really good, and I feel like you keep a lot more kids healthier.
So we've been running golf tournaments for a month now, and we've had to realize how we do stuff sanitation-wise. I will tell you, you're gonna have to hire look at hiring more people to clean the buildings, because it has amped us that we've had to clean everything so much now that you're gonna need, just FYI, probably looking to maybe look to hire more people to do cleaning, because it's taken us hours now instead of what it used to be, because you have to clean it so much and so fast. So. But we've realized that the people adapt to it really quick, and it is harder than heck for the kids to keep them from social distancing. They don't do it.
no.
Yeah.
After you tell them once, and then they get on the first screen and they're already hugging each other and high-fiving, you're like, you've already lost control.
Yeah.
No,
It's
yeah, I
hard
was
enough
gonna
for
say.
us.
Yeah.
But I would just say that you probably need to look at what it would cost to get some more people to clean, because that's all we're doing at tournaments is cleaning everything left and right, nonstop.
I think when he's talking about cleaning too, just from what you hear from teachers, it's allergies.
Ryan's like,
It's a tickle, I swear. It's okay, I have them too.
Why don't you have a mask on?
Because I can't breathe.
I know the
Anyway,
feeling, I can't.
so when our kids, when we get the list home from school, that teachers are like, hey, we need this, we need that, it's not pencils and crayons, it's Clorox wipes and wet wipes and things like that. Before we send that master list out, we need to talk to teachers and be realistic about, like, do we need double the hand sanitizer? Do we need double the Lysol wipes? And get the list right the first time. 'Cause I don't know how many times we've heard, like, we don't use those, or we don't need that, or we really need this. So let's just ask people for it when they're going out to get it. If they bring it, great. If they don't, we're not out anything.
So they've said anything about federal guidelines, like giving any ideas about what you have to do or anything like that with cleaning moving forward in schools? Has that discussion been had at all?
Well, MSBA has their consideration now, as far as, I don't believe, tell us exactly.
The CDC has recommendations. July 1st, DESE has a
Task force.
that they're going to release what they're recommending on July 1st.
Not until July 1, though.
And I think a lot of that's going to be focused on catching up on learning that's been lost and things like that as well. I don't know if they'll get into the nitty-gritty or not.
I think they better.
Yeah.
Because
But the CDC has given some that we can.
some of that is just not reasonable.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Shelby.
Shelby. Okay, moving on to old business. Who's speaking on behalf of the solicitation for Simonson?
So, still working, just giving you an update, really. There's no action on this, just giving you an update of where we are. So hopefully in the next week or two, we're gonna have a solicitation for bid out. This has turned into quite the ordeal. Hard to find even the legal descriptions for the properties over there. I've been working with Cole County Abstract, and they're quite old, so they're working on it and hope to have to me by the end of the week. Been working with Dwayne Schreiman. We had a base of a solicitation for bid and we were ready to go out, and then we found out that the city has a right of first refusal on Major Field. So if we no longer are using Major Field as an educational facility, the city has the right to buy it from us for what they paid for it in 1970 something. Yeah. So, so the way the solicitation for bid, the way that we're working on it is we're going to have the base bid is going to be for Simonson and the parking lot across the street. And then bid alternate A is going to be for Major Field. And then we're going to put notice in there that you can make a bid on this. You're bidding on Simonson and the parking lot, but you're not guaranteed to get Major Field. So you need, if you're bidding, you need to make plans that you may not get that. And talking with the city, they would like to have it, but depending on the project, they will evaluate on a project by project basis. If it's something that really fits the need that the city thinks will help, basically with lower income housing, if someone can come forward with that and show how they're going to use that with Major Field, they would give up that first right of refusal. But they would like it because they're out of space, and so they would like to use that as a parking lot, and then they could build on their parking lot if they needed to by the jail. So hope to have that out in the next week or two, and then probably for sure won't be the July board meeting, but hopefully by the August board meeting we can have something for you to approve, hopefully with a sale.
So without Major Field, though, but all of the land in that block where the building sits is included, is our property?
Well, except for the one little strip,
Houses were down there.
there was a house down there,
On the corner.
right on the corner. It got damaged by the tornado and is no longer there, but I don't even know that the lot is big enough to build on, but it's a tiny little lot.
Is that the one directly across from the old filling station?
Yes,
Cross
the
Creek.
creek, right,
Yeah.
between
Okay.
the creek and
Okay.
that's the only piece that isn't ours.
And then the parking lot across the street
Across the street,
is ours?
correct.
Okay. And is it pretty much everything that we own is paved, or is there any additional space there?
No, it's pretty much
It's pretty
paved.
much all
Right.
parking?
Mhm.
Okay.
And Major Field, in talking with the city, it's really not buildable anyway. It would have to be parking or some type of green space is all you could really use Major Field, because it is a waterway. It's not a flood zone, it's a floodway. So you could build on it, but it would be extremely costly because you would have to pier up and build above. You couldn't dig down and build there because the creek runs right through it, actually, also.
Yeah. So we're just gonna put out a request for proposal?
So it's a solicitation for bid,
Okay.
but basically the same thing. And we're putting in all the specs, buying it as is, and so that's what Dwayne Schreiman's helping with, to make sure we have everything legally that we need in there.
All right. And how are we gonna publicize? I mean, will we have any special ways that we're gonna get out this proposal in front of people that we think, would be the right audience?
We have a couple of people that have approached us and are interested. We know of at least two that we had. Oh, five.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I know we lost one, but.
Yeah, we still have 5 active. Keep on.
That have expressed interest?
Yes.
Okay.
They brought in architects, engineers, looked at
Wow.
the building, they're ready to go.
Mhm.
Okay. All right.
That's awesome.
And I don't know, other than just advertising in the paper and word of mouth and,
So I was just wondering if we think we need a broker or anything.
Jason's doing a fantastic job as our broker.
Yeah.
you're a real estate broker.
Yeah, I was
Put his
gonna
broker
say,
hat on, he'll be all right.
yeah, not to take away from your real estate savvy, but just wondering if we feel like we can generate the interest that we need to get some.
Yeah, and I don't know if it would be, I don't know who that would be. I mean, that would be a national,
Well,
I mean, we already have 5 people locally just from,
no, that's great. If we got 5, that's good. I mean,
yeah.
His commission rate's pretty good.
yeah. Well, I've had a couple of people say, yeah, that if we paid them to take it, they would take it. But
Right.
and
Right.
encourage them to pursue that, so.
Well, thank you for all your work on
Yeah,
that.
Yeah.
Appreciate
thank
it.
you. Frank has done a great job. He's
Thank you, Frank.
taken a lot of people through there, and he's
So we
done a
got
lot.
sunburn.
Is it on the
Because
roof?
there's no windows.
It's on the, yeah.
No roof either.
Okay.
Right, no roof, no windows. All right, thank you.
Thank you,
You're
Jason.
coming right back up, right?
Yes.
Talk about considering to approve the FY 2020 budget.
So the amendment to this budget, so the first thing we do before we do next year's budget is always amend this year's budget, because the way we write a school budget is we get this year as accurate as possible, then we look at next year and see what's different, and then so trying to just fine tune this year's budget. And this year's end of the year budget is quite different than anything I've ever experienced, and next year's budget is even more different. So we're not amending a lot of things that I know are going to be different, but I don't want to skew the budget data. Like, I know our food costs are going to be less than, they're going to come in much less than what we expected them to, but I don't want to amend that budget down and then show it going right back up. So what I'm going to show you here for the end of this year, we're going to end this year better than what we're going to show you. So like subs costs are not going to be as high, our diesel fuel cost, our transportation costs, several of our costs are going to be under, several of our revenues are going to be under. So on the food side also, we're not getting any local food revenue. So we're, but just amending this year's budget, and it's a good story. The first, so most of these are revenue amendments. So we're amending our Title I revenues down $185,000. The next two lines are combined, and so it doesn't really tell the whole story about what's happened with the foundation formula. And I'll talk about that more when I talk about the budget, because it's actually much more than that. But our ADA, our student count actually went up more than what we expected. And so I'll show you what we would have received in April had full funding continued, but based on what we had budgeted, it's really only a decrease of $50,000 based on what we've had budgeted. And so the casinos have been closed during the COVID closure, and this $25 million a month goes into that comes into the state, and that's earmarked for education. And so that was not there. And so that was the first cut that happened in May. And then the cut that happened in June was just general revenue. So there were two different cuts, and I'll talk about that more in the next presentation. So the next one is Prop C. That's the statewide sales tax. Things were ticking along great through the end of February, actually even end of March, and they actually stayed relatively stable. But we reduced the amount that we're going to receive per pupil from 1,010 down to 990. So we're going to get about 210,000 less than that revenue than what we were expecting. The next line, we paid for the street, Cavalier Drive, and that's reimbursement from the city for that. Interest income, again, things were tracking great, and then interest rates went to zero. So we're not going to get our interest income that we expected. E-rate revenues came in a little better. We got some Fund 4, some capital projects money through the Perkins grant, and Dana wrote an equipment grant. So we got $25,000 to help pay for one of our large freezers. The original budget showed us receiving the insurance proceeds for the tornado, and then the only two expenditure changes are taking the expenses out. And so after I realized that when you receive the money and spend it in the same year, you're supposed to net them out so it doesn't overinflate your revenues and overinflate your expenses. So you can see we're taking the insurance proceeds from Fund 1 from $1.5 million down to $148,000, and so that $148,000 was something that we spent prior to June 30th. And then Fund 4 we did receive, so they've paid us part of our money for Simonson above and beyond what we've spent. So that's why you see that big expense or big revenue. And then down below you see the $1.5 million in revenue and the $2 million in Fund 4. Those are netted out against the revenues up above. So just those should wash out. Sale of property through opening Capital City High School. We had property that was at Jefferson City High School and other places that Frank, again, did a great job selling and getting that away. We have increased Medicaid reimbursement, a slight reduction in our special education revenue. Those three lines together, the IDEA, the ECSE 6111 and 619, those three all really go together to make one revenue. And then the focus schools, East has a grant through Title I, and because of COVID, they weren't able to spend all of their money, so they'll get to carry that over to next year. So all of that, we had $233,000 reduction in revenues and $3.5 million reduction in expenses. So that leaves us with the main number to look at is, we were expecting to run a relatively large deficit this year because we didn't have our operating levy to open Capital City High School. We ran a large surplus last year. We were going to run a large deficit this year, and then but that is not as large as we expected it. It's much better than we expected it, and I would expect we're going to come in much better than that when the final numbers come in. So be happy to answer any questions, but need a motion to amend 1920 budget.
Second.
That's quick. All right, any discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Jason, you're up. Again.
Okay.
Thank you.
So now on to, by far, the weirdest budget I've ever tried to work on. I usually feel like I have a pretty good handle on it. I've had a lot of people reaching out to me, and I mean, there's not, as far as the state revenue, there's not a number that I would be willing to bet $10 of my own money that I was right about, because we don't have any idea. And then the expenditure side, we'll talk about it more, but they're not only just custodians, but we're deep into conversations about what school's going to look like next year, but we don't have it all figured out yet. So there are a lot of caveats in this that say, there may be more expenses, more revenue, less revenue, depending on how things shake out. So the budget keys are the operating reserves, and then we'll go through, spend almost all of our time on the operations of the district. So in school accounting, we have 4 funds. We're going to talk about the first 2 funds, which are the general fund, which are support staff salary, non-teacher salaries, supplies, and purchase services. And then there's fund 2 is the teacher's fund, so that is only for teacher salaries and benefits. So those 2 are really in the same checking account, but we account for them differently. And then we'll talk a little bit about debt service and capital projects at the end, but almost all of our time is going to be on the operations. So we're going to start with the reserves, and we're going to end with the reserves. So we just went through amending this year's budget, going to end with $24.4 million, 24.1%. Fund balance, the budget that I'm proposing tonight is going to have almost a $1.9 million deficit, which would bring us down to $22.5 million and a 21.8% fund balance, and we have a goal of 20%. So how do we end up with a 20% goal? So the first part is for cash flow. So we're talking about our June 30 fund balance. And so we are very property tax dependent, one of the most in the state, and we get about 50% of our operating revenue from local property taxes. And when you pay your property taxes, you pay them in December, and we don't receive them until January. So we have to go 6 months of our fiscal year before we get 50% of our revenue. So we need a 13% fund balance just to cash flow until we get that big revenue stream. And then the other part is a rainy day fund, and we haven't had to work on that, but when I look outside, I see it is raining pretty hard. So we're going to talk a lot about that, and we're projecting a $1.9 million use of our reserves. We may have to use more of that, but we have it. We're ahead of where we need to be as far as 20% fund balance goal, And if we have to use more, we'll have to figure out how to make that last going forward. So we'll start with the operating revenues. So like I said, we get over 50% of our operating revenues from property taxes. That's the piece that we don't get until January. You know, it's a blessing and a curse. People hate property taxes because they get that bill at the end of the year, and you know, a lot of their other taxes just flow throughout the whole year. They don't notice all the sales tax they pay. They don't notice a lot of their income taxes that they pay. But boy, writing that check for property taxes, they grumble. But it is very stable, so that is the nice thing about property taxes. It doesn't, like, I'm sure cities and counties are very nervous about their revenue streams more than we are because of the sales tax nature of their revenue. The other 21.8% that we get from the state is our part that makes us nervous, as the state is going through a general revenue crisis. Almost 10% in federal, other local and county is 8%, almost 9% on Prop C. Then we get a tiny little bit of other. So the big one that we get, local property taxes, is a very simple formula. You take the district's assessed valuation times your tax rate times a collection rate, and that's what you get in local property taxes. The problem is we're doing a budget in June. We're not required to be told what our assessed valuation is until the end of July. So that's one of the main components. We don't set our tax rate until August. And we won't know our collection rate until January, but yeah, we're writing a budget in June. So at this point, as far as the assessed valuation, using history as our only real guide, this budget's assuming a $13 million increase in new construction and changes in personal property. This is a non-reassessment year, so all the property that's currently on the books does not change in value. That only happens in a reassessment year. So in odd numbered years, we would expect about $13 million of new construction and changes in personal property. And then in a normal market, you would expect the prices of the property currently on the books to go up a little bit as well. So as you see later when we do long range projections, when I show a reassessment year, there's going to be a bigger number in that value. This does include, yeah.
Did you take into account at all property loss that we had because of the tornadoes? I mean, I know some of these were lower income properties, but some of those on Capitol Avenue were kind of high income property. I mean,
right.
Did you take that into consider? I know you have their formula for what's going to be new, but
right.
did you consider that at all?
So I was very conservative, and I'll show you on the next slide. Before I get there, this is the 8th, this will be, Ameren hasn't appealed yet, but I'm certain that they will, and this would be the 8th year that they would have appealed. The speedy wheels of justice continue to grind away. So if they do appeal this year, we will have over $4 million of funds held at the county that are under protest. So here, Lorelei, is what I was saying. So here you can see the changes in value of during reassessment years in the blue. The checkered one is the average. So in a reassessment year, we average 2.1%. I'm assuming 1%.
Got it.
So every 0.1% change would be a increase or decrease of $50,000. So if it's 0, we'll have 500,000 less. If it gets up close to that 2.1, if it gets to 2, we'd have 500,000 more. So not having good information, not knowing what personal property is doing, although I hear, I mean, the state sales tax revenues have stayed very stable. Actually, through Friday, state sales tax is still up 2% year to date over the same day, and in the end of February, it was up 2%. So during this time, state sales tax has stayed.
Things were really high in February. I mean, just doing sales tax returns.
Uh-huh.
My people were really high in February and going into March, and then, So I think that, you know, some of that way high is offset by some of that way low. So
Right.
I can see that.
Right. So then the tax rate, this is the final rolling in of the tax rate. Last year, we had a 17-cent voluntary rollback. We'll still have a small voluntary rollback that we're going to continue to keep, but rolling in an additional 15 cents. So a person owning a $150,000 house will pay $43 more in 2020 than they did in 2019. So that's just taking care of over half of our revenues right there. So then the other half are made up of a bunch of much smaller ones. So we have a bunch of, there's another 8.3% in other local and county that make up interest income, food sales to our students and staff, fines and forfeitures, state assessed road and utilities, and then the big one, the county stock insurance. So county stock insurance is the one that I can't get any way to predict it. I reached out to Jim Moody, who's a friend of mine at the Capitol. He's a former budget director in the Ashcroft years and is a lobbyist over there and a big budget hawk. And I put him on this to try and get him to find something out. And he couldn't find, he actually put me in contact with the lobbyist from the Department of Revenue. And he just said, and it's got the same thing that I always get, that there are too few taxpayers that pay this, so they can't give me any information because it would be identifiable by the taxpayer. So you can see how it's bounced around in this history, and it's got up to a fairly high level, and then we had this huge spike this year. And this is the money. So this is money we get at the end of August. So that's the other nice thing about this. At the end of August, we know whether we got a lot more money than we were expecting or we got less, and we need to figure out what to do with that. And so because of this big spike, we were able to transfer money to Fund 4 because this is one-time money. We don't want to put it into salaries, put it into things like that, because we can't, not knowing, we can't think we're going to continue to maintain that level of revenue. So we transferred that to Fund 4, and those are the funds that we used to purchase the properties near Jefferson City High School. So
your projection is a little under 3 million for that.
Yes, sorry, I was trying to hit this one. Yeah, so going back to where we were in fiscal year 19, which is a little bit less than we were the 3 years prior to that.
Okay.
Interest income, kind of a roller coaster that we've been on. You can see the long time that we've been near zero interest rates, and we started to see an uptick, and it was continuing to go up prior to March of this year. And so it's ticked back down, and this budget calls for us staying at this $850,000 level because interest rates have gone up back a little bit more, and trying to find other alternative ways of earning interest. Prop C revenue, again, this is the 1% dedicated sales tax, passed in 1982. As we just approved in the fiscal year 20 budget, we went down from $1,010 per prior year weighted ADA to $990, so $20 per student basically is what we reduced our assumption. So we're assuming 8.7 million, and then this calls that we're expecting this to go up a little bit. So hopefully economies are opening. Reading about people having, if you look at the savings rate of people in the last several months, it's gone up considerably. So the enhanced unemployment from the federal level, the stimulus checks. So people, even if they aren't working, have extra money. The savings rate has gone up a lot. So just hoping a little bit of extra sales. So the assumption is that we'll get $175,000 of additional revenue next year from Prop C. So the state basic formula. So in a normal year, there's just a lot of moving parts, and the final moving part. So we know what to think about our change in our ADA normal years. I don't know what to predict. You just saw the parent surveys. Are we going to have 15% of our students that aren't going to come to school next year? We feel like we have to have a plan for them, but even if we do have them coming back, attendance rate we're guessing may be lower. If we're going to have temperature checks and say, I'm sorry, you can't come to school today, maybe that'll make attendance better because then that won't spread. But so the nice thing about the regular year ADA is that you can use the highest of the three most recent years. So if you're a growing district, you estimate what you're going to have in the current year. And if you're not growing, you can rely on the first preceding or the second preceding year. So our ADA was up higher than we expected this year, so we're going to rely on using the current year's ADA. We're not going to estimate, even though in a normal circumstances, we would think we would be growing a little bit next year. So under this, we're going to rely on the first previous year. But with summer school, it doesn't allow you to use your 3 most recent years. You always use your most recent summer school number. So comparing our summer school ADA from last year to what we have in launch and what we can expect to have, we're going to have about 44% reduction in our summer school ADA. And that we always use the most recent summer school ADA. So that's going to be a big reduction in our state aid from that.
So that's what we're down 44% this summer over last summer in terms of numbers participating in summer school.
Correct.
Okay.
Wouldn't you guess most districts are gonna be in that same boat?
There are some districts having in-seat, and I don't know what their enrollment numbers are like, but I would think that most would have a big reduction.
And do we know how that breaks down? I mean, was it higher elementary, secondary? Was it evenly spread over the population?
I think it was mostly elementary, because traditionally we have a very small middle school summer school, and we were already offering our credit recovery like we always have, our online credit recovery. So at the high school level though, PE is a big one, where students want to come in and get their PE credit and get it out of the way. So I would have to get back to you on exactly the distribution of the reduction.
I was just curious if
Mhm.
we knew what that.
So another factor in the foundation formula is the dollar value modifier, and it's a regional cost factor. So that was put in there as you're bringing in a new formula. It was to say that if you live in an urban area, the cost to provide education in your areas is more than if you're in rural Missouri. And so the rural parts of Missouri have a dollar value modifier of 1.0. So you take the value of the formula times 1.0, so you don't get an increase. But like St. Louis is like 1.10, so they get a 10% increase on the value of the formula just for the cost of goods, cost of living in their area. Ours is around 1.033, sorry. And it went down just slightly, and it changes every year, but it was just a very slight. So the way the formula works is it says, what is the cost of an adequate education? And so the next one that we'll talk about is the state adequacy target. But built into the state adequacy target, so they say the original one was we're going to take the districts that scored 100% on the APR and say that is an adequate education. And so they took those districts and they said, all right, what did it cost? What did they spend in these areas? And that's what we should say it takes to provide an adequate education. Well, then they also went through and said, well, what percentage of their students were on free and reduced lunch? And they set that threshold. And up until you get to that threshold, you don't get any weights on your ADA. But when you exceed that threshold, then they say your student body needs more money than these districts that made up the adequate target. And so the threshold for free and reduced lunch drops, and they recalculate that every 2 years like they do the state adequacy target. It dropped almost 2%. So the groups that were performing well are less poor. So 2%. So we already way exceed that. So that automatically is just a 2% bump on our threshold. So our students that qualify for free and reduced lunch, we're already way exceeding the threshold. So now we just get more paid on a few more. We also exceed the threshold on students who have IEPs, and so we'll get a little bit of reduction there because the group of the state adequacy target group, their student body went from 12.06 to 12.83. So just some changes. And then normally we know what the state adequacy target is going to be. It's recalculated every 2 years. Normally the cost of education you would think would go up. It may be because of the grouping, because the groupings change every year. It's not this is the group and what does their cost do? The groupings change. As you can see, the free and reduced lunch dropped by 2%. Well, the state adequacy target, the cost to adequately educate students actually went down by the definition of the formula. But the law says it can't go down. So it stayed the same, $63.75 for the next 2 years. So full funding really didn't cost any money to the state. The General Assembly passed a budget that has full funding. But when we were on a call with Governor Parson, and he went over the withholds that were happening through June, and he didn't give any guidance, but he said that we should be expecting to see withholds in July. They just have cash flow issues, and there's $3.5 billion that goes to the foundation formula. So here's what I told you I was going to go through. So in April of 2020, we were fully funded at a $63.75 state adequacy target and 100% proration. So between the transportation formula and the foundation formula, we were going to get about $22.5 million. Then in May, it came about that the casinos, we weren't going to have enough casino revenue. They didn't have enough general revenue to backfill it. So the state adequacy target went from $63.75 down to $63.10, and then 100% proration. And so under that, and then there was also a cut to transportation in May. So we got a reduction of $657,000 in May. And then in June, so the proration is a very big deal, because about 40% of the districts in the state are what we call hold harmless. So what hold harmless means is you go through the formula and there's a hold harmless amount. And so if you go through the formula and what you get through the formula is less than this hold harmless amount, you don't get the formula amount, you get the hold harmless amount. So you're already getting more money than what the formula says you should get. But for political reasons, you had to keep people not getting less money under the new formula than you have under the old formula. So so if you adjust the state adequacy target and it goes down, those people are already getting held harmless to a higher amount than what the formula does. So only 60% of the districts participate in the cuts if you reduce the state adequacy target. But then the proration is at the bottom. So you go through the formula calculation, you go through the hold harmless, here's how much you get, and then you take a percentage off of that bottom number. Then 100% of the districts participate. And a few years ago, it was passed that DESE couldn't prorate at the bottom anymore. So in the June call, the governor said that all districts are going to participate, and he's going to use his executive order under the emergency declaration that DESE was going to prorate at the bottom. So that took the state adequacy target from 63.10 back up to 63.75, and then prorated at the bottom. So everybody got a 3.5% haircut basically. So you see how there was $130 million and how we only dropped by 220 because we had already taken a pretty big cut in May. And in the discussion, I really think he justified it because we're getting federal CARES dollars, and all districts are getting those. And so he didn't say that, but I'm wondering if he's thinking that how can we say you can get these money and then you don't have to take part in the cuts. But so then next year we've been given no guidance, but when I was working on the budget, the emergency declaration ended this month. So we didn't think that he could prorate at the bottom. Well, now he's extended the emergency declaration through the end of the year. So the budget is written with a reduced state adequacy target and no proration at the bottom, but there's now discussion that he may be able to prorate at the bottom given the extent of the emergency declaration. But so we had an $872,000 reduction this year through June 30th, and so it's not $872 to $1.7 million. It's $872,000 plus $1.7 million, because you can see if we'd have got what we got in April, we'd get $22.5 million, and now we're going to get $20,850,000. So that's the number that I have least confidence in the whole budget. I mean, we have no guidance from DESE. It's just an educated guess. We have fund balances, and we will adjust as need be if we hear differently. And plus, even that's assuming we don't have another shutdown and another spike in the virus.
Has there been any talk at the federal level of any additional support for education coming through any of the other stimulus? I mean,
there's a lot of talk about it, and I think it's.
Do we have any
I don't know that
confidence
it's
in
likely, but I would give it at least a 50-50 chance that there will be additional federal funds for schools and or states. And the governor made it clear on our calls that if we can get federal money to fill our state budget holes, he wants to make sure he flows the money back to education.
That's encouraging.
Right. So federal funding, IDEA, Title I and II, federal food service. So 90% of the federal revenue comes from these three sources. So we actually received a large portion of our CARES money just last week. So when the final numbers come in for this year, it's about $1.2 million that we're going to get. And so that will add to the $856,000 deficit that we had. So that's not in the budget amendment, but that is money that will be in this year. We'll get a little bit more next year. So that made up our pie. I like to talk about our budget as a pie. And so that the revenues set the size of our pie. If we decide we want to spend more money in one of these areas, our pie doesn't get bigger. We've just set the size of our pie by our revenues. But if we want to spend more in an area, that we just have to cut our slices of pie differently. So if we make one slice bigger, other slices have to get smaller to accommodate that. So this year, the budget that's before you is almost $121 million. Capital projects makes up 7.3 of that, and that's assuming all of the bond is completed this year. We may not get it all. I mean, it's just final finishing things and final billing. So I'm hoping we can get that done by June 30th, but it may spill over. But if it did, there would be fund balances to go with that. Debt service is $10.2 million of this, and then operating funds are $103 million, and then there's an additional $781,000 in the budget for student activity. So there's a revenue and an equally offset, and they're held in a separate fund. And so if you think about the basketball team fundraising account, so they raise revenue and they spend money out of that fundraising account, and they carry a balance at the end of the year that we show it on our books, but we don't really budget around it. We just say we're going to bring in $781,000, which is traditionally what we get, spend $781,000 and keep that ending balance about the same. So as with most districts, or not most, all districts spend approximately 80% of their budgets on salaries and benefits. We're a little bit less than that, and part of that is we purchase service some of our things that other districts have as salaries, like we purchase service our transportation. So about half of that is salaries that would normally be in the salary side for us, but is all purchase service. The sub costs that we have are 100% purchase services instead of salaries and benefits. So our total is just under 77%. So in March, when we did the preliminary budget, the board voted to operate the teacher salary schedule for vertical and horizontal step movement, which averaged 1.8% for teachers, gave the same 1.8% for the rest of the classifications of employees, which maintained the base salary at $37,900. We added $175,000 to custodial, para, and food service schedules to maintain our edge on minimum wage increases, and even that doesn't maintain our edge. It just keeps us moving in the right direction. As you can see here, the minimum wage in Missouri, that should be fiscal year 21 in the middle column. It goes from $9.45 to $10.30, so it went up 85 cents. We've raised our custodial wages 60 cents, paras 40, and nutrition services 70. But the minimum wage is going to $12, and we were already at that for these three groups. And we want to make sure next year in March I'll be coming to you again asking for additional money to make sure we stay ahead of that. So now in June, in this budget, recommending an additional $300 to the teacher salary schedule. Would have loved to have done more, just the uncertainty that we're dealing with, and had really good discussions with the NEA leadership and the MSTA leadership, and they understood. But we have so many requirements that are required of our teachers for professional development, just compliance. A lot of it is compliance, and so Shelby's done a great job. We have a platform that have videos, and people can watch these videos, get their compliance training that they need, and they can just get that done whenever they have time. Well, it's been, I wouldn't say it's confrontational, but it's kind of been an issue that's been talked about a lot, that, well, we're having to do this off of our contract time, we should be compensated for this. So the average teacher's daily, so if you take all the teachers on the salary schedule divided by the number of teachers divided by 182 days, it's about $275 a day is what teachers on average make. So the recommendation, and had discussions with MSTA, NEA, Larry and Shelby, Lori and I talked about it. We can add $300 to the teacher salary schedule, which is about their daily rate. Add another day into the calendar. They don't have to come in and actually work on that day. It's similar to our earned days off that we have. They work 2 nights for parent-teacher conferences, and then they get a day off that's paid. So similarly, we'd like to put a day on the calendar, have it identified that you don't come in for this day, but it's a day that you're paid, and then you need, in exchange for that, you're going to do these videos. So MSTA and MEA really liked it. They felt that they'd been heard, that they were being treated as professionals and compensated for it. And so I think it's a good move. It gets us movement on our salary schedule so that we can continue our goal of having the #1 compensation package in mid-Missouri. Doesn't get us there, but it keeps us going in the right direction. So that's a new item for all of you. And
What's the total time that they actually have to, the videos, it takes to view the videos?
So it's about 8 hours, I believe.
Well, when we did this platform 2 years ago, it was a considerable amount. Last year, it ended up being about 4.5, 5 hours, depending on how you navigate it. Because we also include our board policies in that. There are some written documents that we also have in that training platform, so it's not all video.
Okay. But it's reasonable that they can do it in a work day.
Well, and we've also heard from them that, they need additional training in some other areas. So we, with technology, as we've gone virtual, they'd like more trainings in some other areas, so we can add that into that mix as well.
Okay.
So that moves their increase from 1.8% to 2.4% average. Since they're adding a workday, so like our 12-month employees, they can watch those videos while they're at work. The teachers just don't have that time built into their schedule. So no additional pay built in for other classifications of employees. That moves our base teacher pay to $38,200. Also in this budget, working with Chad Suter, he's been a great addition to our team. We've had issues in the past of being able to hire nurses when we've had openings, and he did a great job of looking at what other people in the area are paying, and we had fallen behind on our compensation for our nurses. So we're adding $43,512 to improve our compensation salary schedule for nurses in this budget. So like I said, our goal is to be #1 in mid-Missouri. MSTA does a great service. They get salary schedules from all the districts in the state. They put together a great book. And so the central region, as defined by MSTA's book, has 77 districts in it. And a couple key spots are just your bachelor's step 1, your master's step 1, and the maximum spot on your salary schedule. This year we were second, and you can see the far side shows what #1 would have been. So we were just below bachelor step 1 this year. So adding the $300, if no one else did anything, we would go to number 1 in bachelor's, but I know some of the other districts have added. So we may be second, we may be third, but it will maintain us near the top, not where we want to be, but still near the top. But that is still a goal that we're going to continue to work on.
You say second or third, that's mid-Missouri.
Central Missouri, correct.
Who has the number 1 spot
School of the Osage.
in all 3
Actually, Columbia has the max.
as the max? Okay. Interesting.
If you think of School of the Osage, it has enough lake property that they have a lot of
They got a lot of revenue.
assessed value per pupil revenue there. Because we passed Camdenton. Camdenton, we were third.
Right,
Because
okay.
Camdenton was second.
Interesting.
So also in the budget are 12 additional FTEs, 6 additional teachers as we bring juniors into Capital City High School. Shelby, again, has done a great job working with Jefferson City High School staff and Capital City and transitioning teachers from Jefferson City High School to Capital City, but we knew it wasn't going to, that's why we had the additional operating levy, because we knew it was going to cost us in bringing on additional staff. So it's 6 additional teachers, 3 additional custodians at Capital City. Also has 2 additional special education teachers at the middle schools, 1 at each middle school, and then additional speech therapist. We need to, again, we're thinking of what's different next year versus this year. We have a number of retirements, and if you think of our salary schedule, it's down here on the bottom right where it's $70-some thousand, and they're replaced in the top middle, top left, so $40-some thousand. So we do that enough times that it saves about $300,000 each year just in those movements. So we'll have the same positions, but there's savings. And then moving the summer school cost from salaries to purchase services was a big reduction in salaries. So even all of that total, we have an increase in salary of $447,000. Then employee benefits, 16.5% of our budget is medical insurance, life, long-term disability, work comp, along with PSRS and peers, Social Security, Medicare, and unemployment. So this has been a real bright spot for us for a long time. You can see that in 2009 and 2010, the board contribution per employee was $450 per month. It went up to $460 in 11, $480, then $500, then it was $500 for several years. Then in fiscal year 18, we were able to take an 8% reduction down to $460, and then again in this budget, we're going to be able to keep the $460 a month rate. So
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
a not so great part of the budget is the transportation. We've been through this. We went through the bids. First Student was the low bidder. Our contract expires with them this year. They were the low bidder and it has a 15% rate increase. And I should have had this asterisk, this bottom asterisk, Scott, on almost everything. Like you said, we're probably going to need to look at additional custodians. We may need additional bus routes depending on what we have to do with social distancing. We may need additional monitors to ensure social distancing is happening on our buses. So I probably should have had that potential additional COVID related cost on every slide.
What is our obligation of providing transportation? I'm not sure I
Great
know.
question, yeah. So by state law, we're required to provide transportation to anyone that resides over 3.5 miles from their school.
Okay.
And so, Frank, do you know when we reduced? Oh,
You
good call.
stepped
You knew it was coming.
Yeah, I'm bolting.
He went really fast.
So
Lori?
anybody who
You're
lives.
the only other one that was here that long ago. 6 or 7 years ago, it used to be 3.5 miles, 9 through 12, and it was 1 mile K through 8.
Okay.
And so we reduced it to a mile K through 12 about 5 or 6 years ago. And so that is one of the things we've talked about is if we have to provide social distancing on our buses, do you expand that radius? And that's not a
So
great
that
option.
was a voluntary reduction on our part, it wasn't mandated.
Correct. By
Okay.
law, 3.5 miles is what you're required to do. If you provide transportation less than a mile, you don't get reimbursement for that. So you can provide less than a mile, but you don't get reimbursement from the state, and it's down to 15% of our cost anyway, but.
Well, but
Frank's
don't we,
back.
do we think this is a one-year deal? Because, I mean, once we get the vaccination, right?
I just think that what's
Prob-
next, I mean, it's always gonna be something, and this will be the new, the new thing that everybody's, and, it's the hot button. I mean, it'll be like vaccinating your kids. It's gonna be like, well, I'm not gonna do it unless you can socially distance my kid and you owe it to me. I just am curious. 'cause
They
I
used to
can't-
say the
our
vaccination will be
transportation costs are
mandatory.
crazy.
But riding a bus is an option, and so that was one of the things I'm excited to really dive into the parent answers on their interest in putting their children on a bus next year, because I think we'll have fewer riders.
Well, and if you have a student, so if you're doing screening with temperature, and you have a student that gets there by bus, and they walk up and they test with an elevated temperature, what are you gonna do? You're gonna tell them they can't come into the building, but then, are you gonna provide transportation home? I mean, you
Right.
can't say walk
You'd
home.
have to just be it'd be like, you'd have to go to the nurse's office. It would be like getting a fever in first period. You go sit in the nurse's office.
Or are you gonna temperature them before they get on the bus?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Darned if you do and you're darned if you don't.
yeah, I mean, there's gonna be all kinds of landmines to
I
navigate.
would, in a perfect world, we'd have less bus riders, but I think it'll be the opposite. I think the same amount of kids are gonna ride the bus and their parents' expectations are gonna be higher. The parents are gonna say, well, if you can't sit every other seat, then we want you to get another bus or whatever. I mean, I'm thinking like worst case scenario, but.
Again, it's a shot in the dark. I mean, you're just doing the best you can, guessing.
Right.
Okay.
So again, diesel fuel, we're not gonna buy 172,500 gallons of fuel like we do in most years. We just haven't bought fuel in March, April, and May. And we didn't reduce the budget down, so that's gonna be one of the areas of savings that we will see. So that 35,000 is an increase over what we had budgeted for this year. Just fuel prices have still been low and not really knowing what's gonna happen with fuel prices. So other purchase services, added $100,000 to our substitute budget just because by law, we have to give more leave due to COVID-19. We've kind of discussed though, we have a hard time filling with our current leave policy, even if we have $100,000 more dollars, are there gonna be more subs? A lot of our subs are retired teachers. Are they gonna feel comfortable coming into our building to
You've got more
sub?
people out of work right now, too.
That's correct. But they're getting a lot of enhanced unemployment, so I
That
doubt.
ends in July.
That's gonna stop.
Once school starts, they won't be getting that, so they might need some sub
Yeah,
jobs.
we
Right.
hope.
Property and liability insurance is gonna have an increase. Just other things that make up our other purchase services, there's a list. So summer school was a big increase, so we reduced our salary budget and we've increased our purchase service. So we had a big shift from the percentage of our budget in salaries and benefits to what is purchase services, because we had a $500,000 increase in transportation, we have $100,000 in sub-services. I don't remember the number, I think it was $725,000 was summer school. There was a much bigger number than that 725,000 that was salaries and benefits. So there was a big shift in our budget this year. So in purchase services now up to 12.3%. So supplies, people think, there's not a lot of discretionary stuff when you think about a school budget that people think we're spending and wasting a bunch of supply stuff. If you look at our $8.4 million that we spend on supplies, 44.5% of that is on maintenance and custodial supplies and food. So, there's just not a lot left in a school budget once you get through the people that we employ, the services that we need, and then, we have things that we need. So $8.4 million. Electricity, natural gas, and propane, again, we're gonna come in under our budget here. So this is a $203,000 increase over our budget for this year. Again, just not knowing where rates, we're gonna have more students in Capital City High School, we're not going to be using, well, we're still using all of those trailers. I was going to say we weren't going to be using J Village, but we're now using all of those trailers in other parts of the district. So not sure how to predict utilization or rates. School nutrition services is another bright spot in 07-08, the district was basically losing $560,000 a year in our nutrition services program, and it's supposed to be a break-even program. By 2012-13, the district was running about $100,000 surplus. It has run a surplus every year. It will not run a surplus this year. But that's about $600,000 a year that was going to supplement the food service program that has now been freed up every year to go to other purposes. So we will run a deficit this year. And the reason for that, we do have reduced food cost. Our revenues have dropped off 100%, and we've continued to pay our employees, which makes up 50% of our costs. So while our costs were only cut by 50%, our revenues were cut by nearly 100%.
Have you all discussed, do we anticipate our free and reduced lunch numbers going up as a result of many people losing their jobs? And/or having to take reduced salaries, being furloughed for several weeks? And I mean, I wonder if that's a conversation that's come up.
Unemployment rate is dramatically different.
Right. That isn't actually a conversation we've had, but it's a great point and something we need to talk about. This budget goes back to predicting a small surplus this year, and that includes still purchasing new equipment, keeping our equipment in our kitchens up to date out of that program. So all of that, those are our operating revenues and expenses. So then we need to think about, since everything we do repeats itself year after year, we amended this year's budget because we knew we were going to do all those things again next year, or we're going to do all those things again the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that. So if we're going to, especially now, we're going to run a $1.9 million deficit, you can't do that forever and be paying for reoccurring expenses. So my favorite slide.
I like it too.
That David Luther still makes fun of.
Breaking every rule of
presentations, yeah. I understand. Ryan hasn't given me any trouble about it yet. She knows that won't do any good.
He still does it.
Yeah.
So the first two columns, just to show a little history of where we've been, breaking all the revenues into the big buckets basically that we just went through, the expenditures into the big buckets that we just went through. Here's the $1.8 million deficit that we talked about we're expecting to run this year. Then going forward, I said in the odd numbered years, so 21 and 23, those are reassessment years. So you see we're expecting bigger increases in those years. And then a non-reassessment year, only a 1.3% increase there. This is showing a pretty significant increase in state revenue here because we're getting cuts in the state adequacy target this year. We've lost 133 ADA due to summer school, so bringing those things back, will bring that back up to where it possibly should be going forward. So given that 1.5% increases in salaries would be the 1.8% operating of the salary schedule, but allowing for reductions due to retirements, still no increases. The fund balance in the medical trust account is still very healthy, so still expecting no increases there going forward. Increases in other benefits, small increases in purchase services, no changes in supplies, a 10% increase in utilities. So just some guesses about what it may look like going forward, and you can see that the deficit goes down to nearly a balanced budget in each of the 3 out years, and it gets us right to the 20%. And keep in mind, I've told you, we're right now saying $835,000 deficit. This is going to be a positive number when we end, because we got $1.2 million of CARES money. Other things are going to come in under. So this is going to be much higher than 24.1%. This deficit isn't going to change. I mean, it will change. That's not what it'll be. I can promise you that. but we should be better than 20% out here. And so this just focuses that down on, this is the important part of the slide, just trying to narrow it down. Here's total revenues, expectations going forward, and then the fund balances. That's the important part of.
So just skip to this one and take
Yeah.
the other one out.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave it there in case someone wants to challenge any of my numbers. Transparency.
Do you really think we're gonna do that?
You may not, but someone may. So that was the operations part of the budget, the main, that's the meat and potatoes. So the capital projects budget, we have a larger than normal budget allocated for building upkeep this year. We kind of had to push some things to the side as we did the construction of Capital City High School and Jefferson City High School. We have a lot of projects going on this summer, so $6 million and just keeping our buildings up to date, and $786,000 equipment and technology, $500,000 to complete the land, the demolition project and a land acquisition. This is saying both projects are completed, and we'll end the year with $8.1 million in the capital projects fund. Debt service, this is dedicated fund. These are dedicated funds just for the payment of principal and interest and fees on our general obligation debt. So $13.5 million in revenue, $4.7 million in payment of principal, $5.5 million of interest, ending balance of $13.8 million. And that is basically all. Just some notes about, we're continuing to use the levy that the community passed for us, and it's helped. There's no doubt that we would not be in the situation we are in today to be able to weather this storm without that support. Completing the construction, the phasing in of Capital City High School, all of the uncertainty, but still striving to become a premier school district. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
What amount did we raise the teachers last year?
1,000.
Yeah, 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So what would it cost us if we hypothetically just gave everybody, instead of $300 to $500 salary increase?
So that question is different if you're just giving it to the teachers or you're giving it to everyone.
Just the teachers.
So
Sorry, no offense to you guys.
$200,000 roughly, because we have 800 teachers, so that'd be 160,000 plus PSRS, so it'd be a little less than 200,000. That's here math.
I got you. I just like round numbers. 5 sounds better than 3.
5's not round, generally.
It's a half.
That puts us at a 2 million round budget deficit instead of a 1.8.
I understand that.
That's a nice round number too.
It is.
Well, the only reason I would echo, the only thing that concerns me is when you talk about the amount of time, when you say there's already, 8 hours, or maybe it's less than that now, that are required, but then you also said that there was some additional time that we recognized they needed to spend in order to get really where they need to be on some of the technology that we're going to have to. There's no question we're going to be doing some form of virtual with some part of our student population. And so, the only thing that concerns me is we say, well, we're giving them a day, but is that really enough time to do the additional that they need to?
So I'm on the same page as you. We all know how underpaid our teachers are, and we would all love to pay them
Sure.
significantly more. If
Absolutely.
we went with your plan tonight with the caveat that next year when you come back, we want a focus to be on the teacher's salary, but right now because of all the uncertainty with COVID-19 and the different things we're doing, we can't do it this year, but next year it's one of our goals. Is that something that
That was the discussion that I
Everybody
had
be
with
comfortable
both
with?
the NEA
No,
president and.
I wasn't complaining, I was just trying to get a number,
Yeah.
Yep.
because I was along lines with him, that that's one thing here the teacher said, they're spending more hours at home.
And I think that was Jason's focus too, as far as getting us back up to be that number one again.
Yeah, we have to be number one.
And we've made that, I've made that commitment to NEA and MSTA that, you know, it is our goal. And the board's had discussions about it every year, and I think you all have that as a goal.
I think, yeah, I think it would be great if we go on record of saying that we clearly want to address that. There are so many uncertainties and so many unknowns about state revenue and things like that. It's a little bit scary, but objections, I mean, we still, do you have any information about how, when you talk about us having the 20% plus balance, how does that put us in terms of other districts, comparable size and in the state? Do we know?
I don't.
Do we know?
I don't, and when I talk to districts about budgeting, I just tell them that that's a discussion everybody needs to have with their own district. That some districts, if you're less reliant on personal property taxes, if you're more reliant on the state, you could probably have a little bit less because you get your state aid 1/12 every month, so you don't need as much for cash flow. But then at the same time, you're more reliant on the state, who runs into financial troubles more often than you're that nice, steady, even local property tax. You know, a friend of Larry and I in the Kansas City area, he's got a taxpayer, one single taxpayer that makes up 70% of his operating budget. So he needs to carry like 125% fund balance, because if something were to happen to that taxpayer, now he has a whole lot of money. I mean, it's a very large taxpayer.
Are you good friends with this guy?
Not that good.
Keep working on that friendship, that's for
North
sure.
Kansas City, Fern.
You wanna move?
Yeah.
We have a place for him to buy right over here.
Is it a mine? Is that what it is? Do you remember? Is it a mine? I think John Reinhardt's. Is it a mine?
Yeah, they're wind farms and their energy aspects of there.
Wow. We can all be friends too, just let him know if he needs
Yeah, I
any.
don't know if I'd be that dependent
Well,
or that
ethanol,
reliant
yeah.
on one source.
Right.
Okay, well,
I move to approve the budget as presented.
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you for understanding all that.
Looks like we're.
Future date.
Future dates, yes. And I want to make sure so graduation date, of course, it wasn't June 12th, which second alternative date is July 10th, but I really want to stress that that's not in concrete yet, correct?
That is correct.
That information will be coming out after Friday on the 19th.
Or by this Friday, which
On or
gives,
before?
on or before, gives folks at least 3 weeks notice. And if we can't have it, is in its entirety with all folks having as many folks that they want, that we would extend it to July 31st. If we can't have it then it would be on Saturday, August 1st as our final date with limited numbers in 2 different separate groups.
Okay, I know I've gotten a lot of questions about that from senior parents. Is that something that you can communicate to senior parents?
Yes,
I mean, just kind of give them a,
yes,
All right.
you have a way to communicate with all the students.
thank you.
And I think these dates have been given to them, but we will
They
again.
have.
Yep.
Yeah, but just to remind you just need to keep reminding folks.
Yes. And then our regular board meeting will be Monday, July 13th at 6 o'clock here at the board office.
I'll make a motion to suspend to open to enter into the closed meeting by roll call vote pursuant to chapter 610.021 of the revised statutes of Missouri, section 1, legal actions, 2, leasing, purchase, or sale of real estate, 3, hiring, firing, disciplining, or promoting of an employee, 13, individually identifiable personnel records, and 14, records which are protected from disclosure by law.
Second.
Yes.
Roll
Yes.
call.
Roll call.
Yes.
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 Thank you.
3 minutes?
5 minutes?
Do we need it? You don't